Boom! Welcome back, everybody, to the Omniverse Comics Guide podcast. I am your host, Eric Anthony. Before we begin, if you're watching on YouTube or listening on any podcast platform, thank you for joining us. Please hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up. A comment would help to get the word out to anybody that you'd like to share this with. We really appreciate it. And of course, please visit us at omniversecomics.guide, where we have all of our reading orders, our previous episodes, guests as we have on. And you'll find everything you want to find in regards to the Omniverse Comics guide right there. Now, I'm very excited today because if you've listened to any of our episodes, pretty much every week I mention our guest's name that we have on today. It's my friend JM DeMatteis. Welcome back to the show. Always a pleasure. How are you, sir?
I'm happy to be back. I'm doing fine, all things considered, considering the state of the world. I feel very blessed.
Right? There's yes. And we're blessed to have you here with us. Speaking of blessed, this year has been I've been very, very happy for the comic books being released because you have had a lot of your
Yeah.
collections put together, stuff that I've
And
had
more to
on.
come. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And every month we do an incoming episode where like here's the books to look forward to. And I think I've included one of your books almost every month or at least half of the year. There's something that you've got coming out that I've been waiting for or I've read and they haven't collected in any proper way, like the Spectacular Spider-Man omnibus. How does it feel to have all of these books finally being given the due treatment?
It's great. So far this year, I think in May was the new edition of Moonshadow from Dark Horse.
Yes.
Then DC released Dr. Fate, which I've been waiting 150 years for them to finally do that. We got the Spectacular Spider-Man omnibus. We've got a Scooby Apocalypse omnibus coming out, a new edition of Brooklyn Dreams from Dark Horse,
Yes.
a new edition of Heroes Squared, which was my only
Yes.
creator-owned project with Keith Giffen, which will be out from Boom Studios in October. And I'm sure I'm forgetting things, but that's a lot, and especially Moonshadow has been constantly reprinted over the years, but I've been waiting forever for Dr. Fate and the Spectacular Spider-Man one. It's like taken forever for these things to be collected. So I'm delighted to finally see them out there. And I'm also happy because without getting into details, I got a royalty check for the Dr. Fate book, which indicated to me that it sold well. So that's really nice. And I would think based on the response I saw online, same thing for Spec Spidey.
I've been a long time fan of your work, um, but then there's things that have been hard to find, like getting those Dr. Fate issues. You'd have to go back and collect them single issues because there wasn't even like a
Yeah.
trade for a lot of any of it. It felt like
No,
so.
none of it. None of it.
Yeah. So to see it put together, and there isn't much Dr. Fate really that is compiled to read in an orderly fashion. So this was a real
I
treat.
don't think so. Yeah. I
Yeah.
know like there was like 10 years ago they were putting together some Dr. Fate collections. They were announced and then they never came out. So I'm just I when DC got in touch with me because I wrote an introduction for that edition, I was just thrilled. I didn't know that was coming.
Yeah.
And half the time I don't know it's coming. I'm going through the solicits like everybody else every month. Did they collect that? What did they collect? Oh, that. And sometimes I see stuff get collected that's like, why didn't they just leave those stories alone? And then the
Right.
stuff that you really love sometimes doesn't get collected or it doesn't get collected for 30 years, as the case may be.
Right. So with this Dr. Fate, when it was announced and you saw it delivered to your door, what was the feeling like to see it all put together, bound, collected, being able to be because it is a book that I feel is best read cover to cover as opposed to trying to
Yeah.
yeah, it's got a narrative to it. So what was it like
It's a
to get it all
complete
together?
story,
Yes.
because it was a story. It was that rare thing where we got to completely reinvent the character.
Yes.
First, we did a miniseries and 2 years and an annual of an ongoing series. And then we got to complete the story. Once we were done, that version of Dr. Fate was over. And the next issue, somebody new came along and brought back, the original Kent Ninza, Dr. Fate. So first of all, I look back to the time when those stories were done, which was in the late 80s into early 90s. And I'm amazed at the freedom that I had. It was pre-Vertigo, but Karen Berger was my original editor. Then Art Young, who started out as Karen's assistant, then went on to become an editor, had the same kind of sensibility. took over as editor, and I had complete freedom to do,
Seems like
it
it.
could have been a Vertigo book. It could have been a Vertigo book had Vertigo existed, because it was such a reinvention of the character. And we turned so many things upside down. And at the time when the book came out, I think it confused a lot of people. I said this in the introduction because it wasn't one thing or another. The miniseries, the original miniseries I did, and Keith Giffen did the art. Keith did a brilliant job. So I think Keith and I started working on that before we even worked on JLI. So it was probably the first
Really?
thing we worked on together.
Okay.
Came out afterwards, but it was one of those projects that took forever to get completed because approvals and all kinds of things. But that doesn't matter. So the first miniseries was very, very, really pretty dark.
Hmm.
And then, time went by and JLI came along, and the idea was to let's do a sort of a lighter version spinning out of JLI. But once I got going with the book, it couldn't be just that. And the wonderful thing about that series for me was that I got to put in, every once in a while, you get an opportunity with a series that it becomes a complete reflection of who you are in that moment in space and time.
Yes.
So, yes, there was a lot of humor in the book, but it was also a supernatural book. It was also kind of a superhero book. It was also about metaphysical exploration and spirituality and the search for God, and then there'd be the search for God next to like toilet jokes. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It was
Hmm.
a little bit of everything. It was so I think it really reflected the totality of who I was as a person and as a writer in that moment in time when I wrote it.
Yes. And that's exactly what I wanted to ask you. Can you take us back to who you were or where you were in your life at that time? Because this is a very personal book, as much as any other book that you've written. Like I read, as you mentioned, I'm reading it and I'm like, how did he get permission to do all of this? And
Yes,
then I
I know.
looked at the editor. I
Why
said,
didn't
okay.
they throw me out of the office,
I'm like, how did this get cleared for? Because I maybe at the time it wasn't something that anybody would have batted an eyelash at, but I'm reading it in today's world, and the
Hmm.
relationship between the stepmother and the son, or the stepson in that book to become Dr. Fate. I was thinking to myself, if this was done in 2021 or the 2020s, they would be like, nope, not a chance that you can even suggest
Right, right.
anything.
The truth is that relationship has been wildly misinterpreted also over the years into some kind
Yes,
of incestuous relationship, which it was not. If you read the book, there
right,
is no physical relationship between those people. And as the story goes along, you understand that their connection isn't about those bodies and forms that they're in now, that these are two souls. We're giving spoilers for something that was written in 1990,
yeah, yeah,
These are two souls that have incarnated together, 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 always together from the beginning of time. So their
right,
connection when they first meet, which is very confusing to both of them, is I know this person. I'm intimately connected to this person. And at first, it's very disturbing because it's an adult and a child. Then the child becomes an adult and is Dr. Fate, but isn't. So there is all that confusion until sort of the spiritual dimensions of what's going on happen. So I understand why some people misinterpret that, but it
hmm,
was never in a million years meant to be an incestuous relationship in any way, shape, or form. It's a spiritual connection. These are two souls. We get into one of the issues where they've been everything to each other. They've
hmm.
been husband and wife. They've been father and son. They've been enemies. But whatever their relationship was in any given incarnation, it was the closest relationship
They're
they had in
bound.
that
Yeah.
incarnation. And so here they are now, and they're meant to be. The other thing they sense, even though they don't know it consciously, is they're meant to come together to create the new Dr. Fate as well. So yeah, it gets a little edgy, but it doesn't go over that edge. When I've seen
No.
people refer to it like as some sort of incestuous thing, it actually offends me because that is not what the book is about.
Yeah, I wanted you to clarify that for everybody because it could be one of those things when you start reading that book that could throw somebody off if they come jump to a conclusion and not realize
Right.
that even the relationship that you've spoken about many times, the relationship you've had with Karen Berger as an editor, there's a lot of trust there in each other. You
Hmm.
trust her and she allows you to write the story you want to write because it all comes together at the end. So I'm happy that you were able to clear that up. But it is still an ambitious thing to do with that character who he's a kind of confusing character as it is, kind of like Hawkman. Like you're not really certain, like what's the real
Yeah, yeah.
background here?
I remember doing a lot of reading back then to try to figure this out. And it's the Lords of Chaos and Order, but there's this Egyptian symbology going on, and
Hmm.
it's a little confusing. So that was why it was a good thing. We really just kind of focused on the Chaos and Order thing, um, and that take on the character, as opposed to getting really deep into any Egyptian mysticism or any of that. I think that was just sort of layered over the character, but not really, at least in our version, not really fundamental.
Right. And we've spoken before, and you've brought up Mayor Baba as a mentor to you, somebody very important in your life. Was this a time where you had already discovered it and it had been made clear to you how you felt about this sense of spirituality, or was it something you were
Yes.
discovering as you were reading this and you were including
No,
your
no, very, very, very much so. I had been with Mayor Baba for quite a few years before Dr. Fate came along. And what it did coincide with my first trips to India, which only sort of deepened and expanded that connection. So there's a lot of Mayor Baba running through the series.
hmm
But again, it's I did an interview for a book that someone I know wrote about spirituality in comic books. So there's a lot of Mayor Baba's philosophy and cosmology in here, but it's filtered through me and my interpretation and my worldview. So the same thing, I don't want anyone to look at that and go, well, Mayor Baba must believe this, and that. No, this is me. This is all coming through the filter of my consciousness using both the cosmology and my own insights in terms of that relationship to create stories. To create stories, we've talked about this 100 times. To me, every story gets boiled down to, in some way, shape, or form, who am I? Whether it's psychological, sociological, spiritual, metaphysical, however you want to look at it. The primal question is, who am I? What am I doing here? Why am I on this planet? What is my life about? And you can come up with a million different answers. They could be political answers, sociological answers, psychological answers, spiritual answers. But that's really what Dr. Fate really digs into that. And it digs into the concept of the avatar, which is this idea that God didn't just come once as Jesus or Buddha or Krishna. God comes again and again and again in different forms, in different times, speaking through the veil of that particular time and culture to impart the same eternal truths over and over again, which then get translated and often destroyed by that time and culture along the way. So that divinity keeps coming back. So that's one of the threads that runs through it also, along with many, many wonderfully bad jokes and
hmm
and superhero action and fun supernatural stuff. And I mean, one of my favorite characters in there is the Anti-Fate, Dr. Stoner,
hmm
who was the character we created, who was the head of Arkham Asylum, who just goes nuts and gets co-opted by the Lords of Chaos and becomes the Anti-Fate. Really interesting character. So it's really all the comic book slam and bang, a lot of humor, plus all these metaphysical and spiritual
Yeah.
issues and questions going on. And again, Karen and Art allowed me to pour all that in there. Someone else would have said, "You can't get into all this God stuff in this comic." But the 80s were a different time also. You're right, for not just for the reason that you pointed out. I think for a lot of levels, maybe we couldn't have gotten away with that book today. But in
Yeah.
the 80s, the guardrails were off, and we were encouraged to experiment and play and have a real personal point of view. And Dr. Fate certainly reflects that. A few years later, I guess in the early 2000s, not a few years later, it was a while later, I did The Spectre for DC, was also another two and a half years worth of stories that I always felt was the spiritual successor to Dr. Fate.
Mm.
In that, not that it was the story threads continued, but the themes continued. It was it was the next exploration from where I was in my life then about how I
Okay.
saw life, the universe, and everything. So I hope that one day DC gets around to collecting all those Spectre stories.
We'll make sure that we mention it as much as possible whenever we talk about our most wanted collected editions, because we do episodes like that where
Yeah.
we say this hasn't been put together yet. This needs to be done. Did you have going into Doctor Fate a sense of like I've worked on Doctor Strange and the team aspect with the Defenders and things like that, and I hadn't read your Doctor Strange as of yet, but did you feel like that was sort of practice? Like I know how to work within this world of the occult and magic, but also blending it in with strong character stuff. Was Dr. Fate like, okay, this is the DC version of that? And did it throw you for a loop when you realized like, oh, this is different? Or was it different?
No, first of all, I love all the supernatural corners of the DC universe. Of all the supernatural, I mean, I love Doctor Strange. He's, one of my absolute favorite Marvel characters because those characters become doorways to these kinds of stories, stories that you really can't tell with Spider-Man and Captain America and Batman,
Right.
stories that get into much deeper metaphysical dimensions. So, I had done stories like that at Marvel with Doctor Strange. One of my favorite things I did at Marvel was the graphic novel that I did with Dan Green called Into Shambhala,
Hmm.
which finally also about a year ago got reprinted in a Marvel Treasury edition. It had been out of print for 30 years. One of the best things I've ever done. Same thing, using that character as a doorway to explore these questions. So, no, it wasn't intimidating at all. It was just like, let's jump in and let's have some fun and let's play. And the miniseries set it up, but it didn't really explode and expand for me until we did the ongoing series. Because then it was like, I get to do everything I want to do. The miniseries was great, and Keith's work on that was just fantastic. When you work with Keith when he was, quote, just the artist, he would always surprise me by spinning things around in the artwork and doing things that I didn't expect and throwing in little events here. One of my favorite things, and I've talked about this to somebody recently, when Kent Nelson first shows up in the miniseries, and he's got Naboo inside him, we've resurrected Kent Nelson's dead body, and there's a big mouth in Kent Nelson's stomach, and that's how Naboo is communicating. That was my memory is that Keith just did that, and I just thought this is brilliant. Keith would always just throw in these brilliant things, and I think Dave Hunt was the inker, and he really did a beautiful job inking Keith on that. I worked with Keith on a number of things, a lot of backups when we did JLI, where he was also doing the penciling. But what we always talked about for years was getting together and doing a big series uh, where he penciled the whole thing, where we'd Lee and Kirby it. We talk about the plot, and then he'd go off and draw the whole thing, and then I dialogue it, and um, we never got to do that big thing that we wanted to do. At one point, we talked about doing Fantastic Four at Marvel, but
Oh,
although that we were going to do with Kevin McGuire. We were going to do that with McGuire, and that we could never sell them on it, believe it or not. But anyway, working with Keith on that was great. And then I got Sean McManus on the ongoing. That was the first time I'd worked with Sean, who became and remains one of my all-time favorite collaborators on the multiverse stuff, our Kickstarter
yeah.
project. He's done the art on Layla in the Land of Afters, Layla in the Lands of After. Let me get that straight. And Sean is one of those guys who, from whatever I started working with him in 1989, it's now 2025, and he just keeps getting better and better and better. His work on Layla is some of the most beautiful work I've ever seen him do. So to have collaborators like that, comics, I don't care how brilliant any writer may be, if you're not matched with just the right artist, it's not going to work because it's a collaborative medium. And that person is giving life to your story through those visuals. And if that balance isn't just right, the greatest story in the world could just roll over and die.
Yeah.
And so to have Keith and Sean on those books was just phenomenal. I believe Mark McKenna inked the first 6 issues of the ongoing, and then Sean inked himself for the rest. And we had
So
we had some fill-in art along the way. I remember Jim Fern, and then we did an annual that I think Tom Sutton did the art on.
oh, that's my
Go
dog in
ahead.
the background. No, I was just gonna say
Uh,
with Sean McManus, how how much experience had he had up to that point in the comic book field as far as like an ongoing artist? Because the reason I asked that is he he's put onto this book with you that is really going to make him draw some different stuff. Was there ever a
yeah.
moment where you saw like, okay, this guy can do it? Because you guys were a perfect collaboration for this story. But were there any moments for him where he's like, whoa, you're gonna make me draw that? That's kind of crazy. Like, how did that?
Yeah, I don't, if he had any hesitation, I never heard about it. Sean is a really easygoing guy and a hard worker. And he's the kind of guy I think that will take any challenge you throw him and
Yeah.
rise to meet it. And anything I asked him, if it was like, 4 panels of subtle facial changes, he could do it. If it was at one point the rebirth of the entire universe, he could do it, and everything in between. He could do the comedy, he could do the supernatural, he could do the human drama. He did it all. And, he's got a style that can just right come up on the edge of cartoony, but it's also very dramatic and very serious at the same time. You've never seen Darkseid smile the way he smiles in this series,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the way that Sean drew that. Yeah, Sean, I could talk about Sean all day. He's just one of the best, just one of the best. So to have Keith and Sean, man, that's incredible.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible collection. It is definitely something different from anything that you'll see on the shelf. Don't I would say to readers, don't let it intimidate you if you've never read Dr. Fate. Give this a shot, especially if you like things that kind of penetrate the mind as you read it. It makes you go back and look at the pictures as what are they saying and why are these pictures so beautiful? Because there's some moments that Sean takes you to a place where like your story, your narrative has brought us there, but now you've got this visual where you're just like, is this the beginning of time? Is that what he's just drawn here? That's what it
Right,
feels like. And
right,
it's
exactly, exactly.
incredible.
Or we take a journey to the afterlife, and he brings that to life so beautifully.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would stress to anyone that hasn't read it before is what I said earlier. It's got a beginning, middle, and end. It's a
Yeah.
complete story. The serialized storytelling with these characters that have been around for 80 years or whatever, the main limitation is you can change them just so much before they have to kind of go bang and bounce back,
Right.
because they're going to be around long after you're around, and they're going to have to, no matter how much you play with Batman, and certainly he's been portrayed a lot of different ways. There's an essence of Batman. Bruce Wayne is never going to go to therapy, get over his parents' death, hang up the costume, and just be a philanthropist. Although in the miniseries that I did at DC a couple of years ago, which was the Robin Lives thing, I actually did that, but that was because it was an alternate history.
Right.
Um, but with Doctor Fate, we got to completely, tear it apart, put it back together again, and complete the story. And you don't get a chance to do that very often
No.
in mainstream comics. So that was really unique.
Yeah, and I love that it's collected for that purpose because a lot of times this is a hobby with a heavy investment. You can start one series, it's like you got to get 4 volumes that all cost this much money
Hmm.
to complete the story. But in this case, you get 25 issues, 2 years worth of solid storytelling with the writer, with the artist getting their vision complete. And that doesn't happen too often. So
Yeah.
I'm so happy that this was finally collected for you to have on your shelf.
Yeah. I
And
just
it
realized
really,
it's 24 issues of the ongoing, 4 issues of the miniseries plus an annual. So there's a
yeah.
lot of story in there. Yeah.
Great price point. I love these little compendiums they're making now. It's a great option. Speaking of collaborators that you perfectly meshed well with, and I think this a lot should be said about this next artist of how well he blended with everybody, and that's Sal Buscema with the spectacular Spider-Man run that he had. He got to work with Bill Mantlo, then Jerry Conway, and then followed by you. At that time, it's easy to say that the Amazing Spider-Man book was a lot of style, more style over substance, where artists were getting a chance to really cut their teeth on the character and make a name for themselves drawing the Amazing Spider-Man book. But Sal had been on Spectacular for quite a while, and this felt like more of the character-driven book at the time. Did you find that to be the case too when you got to write for Spectacular?
I wasn't following the book before I came on the book really,
Okay,
in any detail. You have to obviously, if you're jumping into a book, you have to be aware of what's come just before you jump in. But I was intimately familiar with Spider-Man. So I wasn't thinking about, oh, this is that book and Spectacular is more
hmm,
character driven, because my stories are more character driven anyway.
right.
So I'm just coming on the book and I'm going to write the stories that I want to write. And once again, I was lucky enough to have Danny Fingeroth as my editor, who allowed me to really carve out my own little corner of the
Yes.
Spider-Man universe and tell the stories that I wanted to tell in the way I wanted to tell them. And later on, Rob Tokar, for the last bunch of issues, was the editor. Also, was a great guy to work with. Um, so again, very lucky with the creative freedom that I was given on that book to really just not have to worry that much about what was going on in the other books. If something was important that needed to be mentioned, it got mentioned. But basically, I got to focus on the stories that I wanted to tell and to tell them in the way I wanted to tell. And then I am blessed with one of the greatest artists to ever work in comics, as far as I'm concerned, Sal Buscema, one of the greatest visual storytellers.
Yeah.
He can draw like no. Same thing I said about Sean. You want a nice quiet moment. You want I would give him these like 9 or 12 panel pages where it's like the smallest changes in expression on a character from panel to panel. He would do that. You want the greatest punch in comics, Sal Buscema punch. I don't know how many plots I've written where I've said, give us a Sal Buscema punch here, because everybody knows what I mean when you see when Sal does that thing and the character
Yeah.
goes flying at the camera.
Yeah.
And the human moments, the action moments, if we did, we had that very lighthearted story with the Frogman.
Hmm.
He could do the comedy. He's just, and he was inking himself. When
Yeah.
Sal's inking himself, he's at his best. For years Marvel used him as their pinch hitter for a lot of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
We need an artist to come in and get this out, and Sal would come in and do breakdowns, and somebody else would do the finishes. And I worked with him on a few things before that. He did some fill-ins on Captain America and Marvel Team
Hmm.
Up, and they were always great, but they were just breakdowns, and someone else would finish it off. So to work with Sal when he was finishing it himself, and this is the guy who had been in the business for years by that point, was still taking a life drawing class every week. He was really dedicated to his craft.
That's
He
humility.
was also,
That's amazing.
yeah, and I don't want to use the word was as if he's not here. Sal is still very much with us, but I know he was very into theater, so so he understood the acting on the page because he was an actor as well. He would do,
Wow.
I think he did community theater, and he was also just one of the nicest human beings you could ever want to collaborate with. So you put all those things together, you hope that you have a collaborator who is really good at what they do and is a really good human being that you can get along with. It doesn't
Yeah.
always work out that way.
Yeah.
And with Sal, it absolutely worked out that way.
Yeah. Everybody says that about him, which is beautiful to hear. Such a good
Yeah.
like Archie Goodwin. People talk about Archie Goodwin in that same vein where it's just like
Yeah.
you can't say anything
Yeah,
bad about these
absolutely.
guys. His work from the time he was on Mighty Thor and he took over for Walt Simonson and then into his stuff with Spider-Man, it's just for me stellar Spider-Man stuff where he's really like you said, it makes sense now because one of the things that I really like about his Spider-Man stuff is those moments where Peter and MJ are having a conversation, whether they get cross with each other or whether they break down with each other. You really get the sense of the weight of your words with how he's put them on the page. Like there was a fight I think that Peter and Mary had uh, almost at the penultimate moments of this story when it came to Harry, spoilers, Harry and Peter's altercations. And there's just you can see Peter breaking down. He's starting to have no patience. He's starting to not want to be around. He wants to be alone more often than not. And Sal's art really brings to life your dialogue that they have, which now makes perfect sense that he was a theater actor. Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And the plots when I wrote for Sal, different artists respond differently, but I wrote very, very tight plots, page by page, panel by panel, camera angles, everything. But give that same plot to 5 different artists, you're going to get 5 different stories back in a lot of ways because
Hmm.
even no matter how tightly I may describe something, what they choose to emphasize in that panel, how they get that panel to flow into the next panel, the emotion that they're able to communicate through those faces, through that body language. Each artist is going to do it differently. So, Sal always either met or more often than not exceeded my expectations with what he did on that book.
Yeah. Yeah, what a gem it would have been to work with for you to have been able to work with him. Because again, the other thing too is that those stories, just like in your style, they get very much into the psychological aspect of who am I?
Yes.
And you really take Peter. I don't know if it had been done quite as heavily up until that point, Craven's Last Hunt, which happened to be written by you, would have been the one of those first times where you really get into the psychology of Spider-Man. And then this time, right away, Child Within, which I feel is like I call it the Godfather to Craven's Last Hunt, where you're picking up the
Very much
pieces.
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
very much so.
and I know how important that story is to you, especially with the usage of Vermin. You use him a lot throughout your series here to explore the ugly side that can come out of any of us. How important was that story for you to be able to, again, tough subject. You never go into saying
Yeah.
exactly what happens to Ed. That's Edward, right? You never
Yeah,
say
Edward. Yeah.
explain what happened, but insinuated enough that the reader feels uncomfortable and understands. So putting
Yeah.
that together,
Yeah. Well,
go ahead.
again, it goes to Danny and also Tom DeFalco, who was editor in chief at the time, that they same thing with Karen and Art on Dr. Fate, that they allowed me to do a story. The Child Within is just about that. It's about the trauma that not everybody, but a lot of people go through in their childhood and how that impacts and shapes them as adults. Peter, it's not just Uncle Ben. I realized when I was writing that no one had ever really dealt with the impact Peter's parents' death had on him. He was only 4 or 5 years old when that happened, but it doesn't matter. We take those things in, that trauma in, and one of the things that I saw in myself and in others is that when certain things happen when you're a kid and it's traumatic and it's really a force moving from without and acting upon you, one of the ways that abused children think that they have some sense of control is to take the responsibility on themselves of it as if it's their fault, whether it's mommy and
Hmm.
daddy getting divorced or
Right.
someone's being abused or whatever that thing may be. So what Peter didn't even realize consciously is that he internalized all this guilt. And then Uncle Ben, the murder of Uncle Ben on top of that, is just kind of, you can take that and it's like dropping a weight through the psyche and the whole thing collapses. And then Harry, with his abusive relationship with his father, and then with Edward, which is where he got into a very delicate situation, I wanted to do a story that dealt with child sexual abuse and the trauma that that creates and the pain. And Vermin becomes the very embodiment of that, that the kid takes on the guilt, the shame. They feel like they're the monster somehow, as
Hmm.
opposed to the monster that's doing this to them. And that literally is what happened to Edward when he became Vermin, that the process that turned him into Vermin externalized his own psychological part of it, the part of himself that believed that he was this unworthy vermin that deserved to live in the sewers. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And it was very delicate, and I approached it very delicately. Just what you said. We don't come out and wave any big flags,
Yeah.
Nobody put across the cover. This month we deal with child abuse.
Yeah.
It wasn't about that. It was all within the context of the story and the themes of the story. And I believe that we handled it with delicacy and taste. And I'm forever grateful. At the time with both of these stories, Dr. Fate and this, you're working away every month. You're not even thinking about, oh, well, we're dealing with this issue and done. You're just trying to tell the best story you can within the themes that you're working with. I look back now and I realize, wow, that was a huge deal that we were allowed to do that we did it the way that we did it, and that Danny and Tom allowed us to do it, and didn't. Another editor might have jumped in and said, no, 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 you can't
Not a
do this.
shot. Yeah.
But they allowed us to do it, and it remains, you know, uh, probably if I'm going to pick like a multi-part Spider-Man story, I think it's my favorite, The Child Within. And I think it edges out even Craven's Last Hunt.
Yeah.
You know,
That that.
it's but they all, in a way, as you pointed out, they sort of, if you can go from Craven's Last Hunt to Soul of the Hunter to Child Within, and that's like that would be a nice collection actually. That's like
Hmm.
one massive story there, you know.
Right.
And
Right.
then later on in the run, we have the death of Vermin, which deals with Edward's evolution out of the Vermin form.
Yeah. I'm happy you brought up that word death. It's a theme throughout your work that I notice is something you lean into, the transcendence, the approach of the inevitable. And in this Spider-Man run, there you've got what ultimately, spoilers, Spectacular Spider-Man 200, a very significant death in Spider-Man's life, Peter's life. You've got what's happening with the Vulture. You've got what's happening with Vermin. It's not concluded what necessarily happens to Puma, but you're allowing Spider-Man to really confront the final act for a lot of his villains. Was this something that you got permission for because you're JMD and they trust you? Was it, this is a multi-layered question. Was it that, well, people can always find a way to come back? Or did you figure, and this is what I'm thinking when I'm reading it, this has been 30 years now. You get to write the 30th anniversary issue of Spectacular Spider-Man as far as his publishing is concerned. Did you feel like some of these guys are going to have to eventually meet their maker because they've been around this long and we keep writing Spider-Man and he gets new villains? Was there anything like that in your mind, or did you
It
just
wasn't
say,
even that much. You know what? When I write very intuitively. I follow the stories, I follow the characters. People have asked me, when you started that run, did you know it was going to end with spoilers 30
yeah,
years later, the death of Harry Osborn in Spec 200? No, I didn't know. I started this Peter Harry story going,
yeah,
and that's where the characters led me. That's where the story led me. So, and in terms of that coming up again and again, it's just who am I is one of the primal questions. And we all wake up and we know that at someday there is going to be an ending, which also provokes the questions of who am I and why am I here.
right.
So those all part of the same themes rolling through all this stuff.
Yeah, because the other thing too,
So it
and it,
wasn't intentional, is what I'm saying. I didn't say I'm going to do this and this is going to be. I'm going to. Oh, let's write about death a lot. No, it just kind of
let's
came
kill all of
naturally.
Spider-Man's characters. No, I understand. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was in that anniversary issue where one of the backup stories, you have Aunt May wake up from a dream, where I kind of see. I remember you saying to me that I had asked you prior, Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man 400, where Aunt May reveals that she's known this whole time Peter's secret. And it seems like that little moment there, that backstory was her. You as a reader, you can say, "Oh, Aunt May is she's sharp. She's not some naive, bumbling old lady that just is easy to fool." Especially when Peter's parents show up again in the story, you can see that she almost has Spider-Man's back a little bit. Like you're planting little seeds there. Did you know at that point that Aunt May knew about Peter's life?
I don't think I did. Now, here's the thing, though. As a writer,
Yeah.
I didn't know. Did my unconscious mind know? Was my unconscious mind sowing those seeds, even though my conscious mind wasn't aware at that moment?
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah.
story, too, I have to mention, was drawn by Bob McLeod, who's mostly known as an inker, but is a wonderful artist, and he did a beautiful job. It was just a 5-page story. And when you write a character, as opposed to when you're a reader, you discover different things about them. I was never particularly, as a Spider-Man reader, fond of Aunt May because I know it's that old lady who's always sick. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, she's in the way.
And then I started to write her. Originally when I was doing Marvel Team Up, but really, really dug in with this spectacular run to learn as I write what a deep, interesting and strong woman this was. Not like
Yeah.
the weak little word, oh, Peter, what are you going to put on a
Yeah.
sweater? That whole routine.
Yeah, yeah.
She's a very strong woman who's been through a lot in her life and keeps getting knocked down and keeps getting up. What does Spider-Man do? He keeps getting knocked down and he keeps getting up. Where did he learn that? And I'm realizing that as I'm saying it. He learned it from Aunt May.
Hmm.
And I probably have written this somewhere, but she's one of the sources of his strength, not the spider that bit him. Aunt May is one of the sources of his strength.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
She's
And
a great
it's
character. I really loved writing her.
yeah, and you did a great job doing it. One of the best writers behind Aunt May's dialogue for sure. Um, I asked Jerry Conway this question once when he started writing Amazing Spider-Man the first time around, his first opportunity. Him and Peter were the same age, like art
Which is
imitating.
amazing when you think about it now. Wasn't he like 19 or something when he started
Yeah,
writing Amazing?
yeah, he
Yeah,
was. It's so
incredible.
really cool way to like get into the shoes of that character when you're like almost Peter Parker. You're writing the real life of, can
Mm-hmm.
mirror yours. So
Mm-hmm.
when you get onto Spectacular Spider-Man, I don't know exactly the years that it was, but you were relatively newly married. Peter is newly married in this relationship with
Yeah.
his
Yes.
soulmate in a way. It's like you're my anchor. Mary Jane is my anchor. Did you find sort of therapeutic to be able to say like I'm in a relationship now where we're going through life and figuring things? Did it help you?
Yeah, a lot. I don't know if it helped me, but I think a lot of my relationship with my wife went into my approach to Peter and MJ and their connection to each other. We have a piece of art hanging on the wall downstairs from Spectacular Spider-Man, which is some dialogue between Peter and MJ, which is just very much dialogue that came from our lives in a lot of ways. Because, you know, it's just what you're saying. Conway was 19 and he was relating to young Peter, and here Peter is married, and here I'm married, and and I think that's why I love the Peter MJ relationship so much. There are people that don't like it and don't want it. I'm always happy to write the two of them because I'm a relationship guy. I
Hmm.
like being married. I like being in a relationship. I like having that partner to walk through life with. And so I'm always going to gravitate toward that.
Yeah. I didn't realize it until I was older and I would pay more attention to the credits of who wrote which issue because at this time, right before you or just after you finish Spectacular, you get onto the Amazing book, and now you've got so many Spider-Man titles constantly. So it all seems to blur and blend sometimes.
Yeah.
But I remember when they reversed and did the Mephisto change and one day, one more day, all that stuff, and people were up in arms about how they chose to end the relationship. I was one of those people who didn't like it because I was the right age. I was 8 years old, 10 years old when you were writing these stories, and the marriage was the focal point. So for me, like a lot of the relationship stuff comes from the stuff that you wrote, not me not realizing like they're such a good couple together. You got to keep them together. So it
Right.
makes sense
Right.
now that the person behind it was a person who enjoyed being married and liked having, putting it out there. Yeah, they do fight and then they do come to a resolution because this is what real couples do. So I get
Exactly.
it. I get why my era of Spider-Man, it's like, no, Spider-Man is married. He's supposed to be with Mary Jane. You don't change that.
Right. And these days it seems like there's so many different Spider-Man books, and there's some of them, it's the ultimate universe.
Yeah,
I think there's a universe where Peter and Mary Jane are married, and now I'm
yeah,
I'm writing Spider-Man 94 set in the animated universe where they're together. They're not married, but they are married. That's right. Well, it's a weird question with Spider-Man 94 because he was married to a clone, and then the
right.
real MJ came back. That's a whole other can of worms that we deal with in the series. But any opportunity to write Peter and MJ, I love because I just love them together. I just
Yeah.
do. Gwen Stacy has made this comeback via the Spider-Verse. But if you go back to the original Gwen Stacy thing, Gwen was okay. I was never like hugely attached to Gwen, because I never felt that she quite came alive in the way that MJ did
Yeah.
as a character, as a person. So I always gravitated to MJ.
Yeah, I mean, the passion that they have for each other and the way that they are able to support each other. Like for her to even have been in on the secret and to accept the fact like I'm willing to marry you even though I know what it's going to mean for our lives. It's brought up all the time. She's like, I signed up for this. I know what he's got to do,
Right.
and I'm going to be there. And it's so important for these for men, I think, anybody, men, women, to have that anchor point in life, like a love anchor point,
Yeah.
because what it
Yeah.
does
Well, it
for,
works both ways, right?
yeah, it works both
She's an
ways.
anchor for him and he's an anchor for her.
Yeah, yeah. There was that moment where he upsets her, or he storms out, and he realizes like, why did I speak that way to her? And he comes back with like a room full of flowers, just a perfect little
Right.
touch, right? That's
Right.
great.
One
Um,
of my favorite Mary Jane things was from my second run on Spectacular, where the chameleon shows up and Peter's not there, and Mary Jane beats the hell out of him with a baseball bat. It's like, I am not the damsel in distress. Oh, you're going to come into my house? I'm going to take you out.
yeah, yeah, that's great. No, it's always better when you see, well, the Marvel universe was special because the characters moved with you in time, right?
Yeah,
That was part, like you get older with them. And then when that kind of gets lost, it's like, okay, we can always go back and read these stories, but there's something special about
exactly.
growing with the characters.
Right, but
Speaking,
when you have when Stan and Steve Ditko say we're doing Spider-Man back in the 60s, so well, let's have him graduate from high school. Let's have him go to college. They weren't thinking what's going to happen 50, 60 years from now.
yeah,
They probably didn't think that stuff was going to last. They well, probably all thought we could be, we'll be on to the next batch of characters in 6 months. Who knows? So it's hard to keep if I under so I understand the point of view that wants to keep Peter single and do all that because it's hard to keep growing and evolving. So what happens? Peter's going to get old, they're going to have kids, and well, we've seen versions of that, obviously. But in the
hmm,
main book, because every generation is going to need their young Spider-Man. But the,
right,
the great thing is, like with these miniseries I've done, I can jump all through time. The one I did last year, Shadow of the Green Goblin, was like
hmm,
set like 2 weeks after Uncle Ben was killed. So I got to really dig deep into that version of Peter, which was really a lot of fun. So there are so many different little avenues to explore. But I understand why, from an editorial point of view, Just like I said, Bruce Wayne can't go to therapy and get over being Batman. Peter can't keep getting older and older and older because I hate to use this phrase, it's an IP, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they have movies and they have TV shows and animated shows and underoos and whatever else, and they have to kind of keep the central Spider-Man a certain
Got to
way.
keep it in amber in a way. I know. You're right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But the good thing is we have all this stuff being collected now. So big kids like me can go back to 1992 and feel like I'm getting the whole story now. I'm not missing a piece of it, which is it scratches the
Right.
collector's itch. Can you tell me a little bit about Dr. Kafka? Because within this series, I mean, she shows up throughout the Spider-Man series for years after, but I wasn't sure where she first appeared, and it's at the beginning of your series.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
she's a perfect character to have with the story that you end up telling with everybody involved. So where did Dr. Kafka come from in your imagination? Tell us about her a bit.
Well, Child Within was about really, really digging deep and, plumbing the depths of the psyches of these characters. Um, I spent many years in therapy, and it was very, very, very valuable to me. I think it's a great tool for people. I think the people that ignore that aspect of their lives, it's sort of like saying, "Oh, I broke my leg, but I don't have to put it in a cast. I can just hobble; it'll heal itself." It's the same thing. We all have issues in our lives. We all have struggles, and therapy is a really, really valuable tool and a way to deal with that. And so I wanted to introduce a character who could do that within the context of that story. And she went on to go on and remain in the book and other books along the way, although I think they killed her off and cloned her and did all kinds of weird shit that happens in comic books that I don't understand. Also, I had a friend, a wonderful woman named Freda Kafka, who was a therapist. And I
Mm.
thought, Kafka. I mean, it's such a comic book name, Franz Kafka, Metamorphosis, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Kafka's the perfect name. So, uh, she was not literally a version of the person that I
Mm-hmm.
knew, but she was inspired by her in that way. Wonderful woman, wonderful therapist. Um, but the character is the character, and the character becomes their own thing. So it wasn't like I'm going to put my friend in the book and let
Right.
it be exactly her. That's not what it was. But it was inspired by this woman, and so yeah. So it was one more tool to pry open these psyches, and then she became important and ended up being in charge of Ravencroft and all that. Some people seem to think that the first Dr. Kafka story is the first Ravencroft story, but it's not. They've sort of like back channeled it to say, well, that's where Ravencroft started. But I don't even, I was with all the other writers. I'm not sure who the hell came up with Ravencroft or when, but I don't think when I wrote that Dr. Kafka story, it was it was Ravencroft. I don't think, although she had some kind of complex going there
Yeah.
because she had vermin in a cell with video cameras and all that. So maybe it was, I don't know, but I don't think it was officially Ravencroft at that point. Ravencroft became official as it went along, and then it became assumed that that's what Kafka was doing, and she was the head of Ravencroft. It was also great when I did the Ben Riley series a few years ago to go back and revisit the Dr. Kafka character, because she's just, one of those characters that's very close to my heart.
Yeah, and it was like you said, such a good tool to use because those moments with Vermin where he's struggling with his conscience, to have somebody when he can't speak, when you have somebody observe him, and it's like you see it in the cursive writing in the text boxes where you realize she's observing everybody around her. And people oftentimes they might tease you because you read comic books, a grown man reading comic books, but there's a lot of psychological heady things that in the child within, just that itself, where you take those three characters and you examine their childhood. And yeah, they become these weird people when they're older, wearing costumes or mutated into a rat, but that's not really the point. Those are more metaphors. And it's two stories.
Exactly.
It's a metaphor of who we are, or a window into maybe another dimension that, that's what it could be like somewhere else if we don't keep ourselves in check. But to use Dr. Kafka in such uh, a useful way, I mean, it really helps the reader along to understand the psychological portion. And again, when these were coming out, the target audience, they weren't 40-year-old people like myself. They were 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds reading this stuff. So quite ambitious to want to put that kind of stuff out
Well,
there,
but
trusting
remember
the
that it was
audience
the
too.
80s. It was
Yes.
right. It was also the time of, Dark Knight, Watchmen, Epic
Mm-hmm.
Comics,
Mm-hmm.
Career Comics. So there was also an older audience there. It wasn't just kids.
And
But obviously there were a lot of kids reading it, but there was also an older audience that was there for this kind of material.
yeah, and I think there was a certain trust as well that the writers had with their audience. Like they'll get it. Like whoever it is, whether they're
Yeah.
older, whether you they'll get this. It's not too much for any of the readers that like our demographic will appreciate this story. So yeah,
And I'm not even thinking in a lot of ways about the audience in that way. I'm thinking, how can I write the best story I can possibly write? And
yeah,
that's my main concern,
yeah.
And I've often said in the past, the audience that I imagine in my head is someone like myself. And what I mean by that is, as a reader, when I read stories that really click with me, I take them really deep into my heart and they really matter to me.
Yeah,
So that if I
feels
ever have
like
a
it.
reader in mind, it's that kind of reader, someone who's really he's there, he or she is there for this stuff. And they're
Right.
going to really take it in and get it. And if someone doesn't get it, that's okay.
Hmm.
Not every story is going to, if we think every story is going to land with every person, we're insane. You know what I mean?
Right.
It doesn't work that way in art or in life. It just doesn't work that way. It's just, I always say, once I'm done with a story, I sail it out into the world. It's out of my hands. The audience decides how it's going to be received. And sometimes the thing I think is the best thing I've ever written goes out there, sinks like a stone. Something else that I think, well, that was just okay, but I was okay. And then it goes out and everybody loves it. Or they hate it, and 20 years later, you discover that everybody loves it. They didn't love it then, they love it now. So I have no control. All I can do, my only job is to do the best I can do. On some days, my best is really, really good. On some
Hmm.
days, my best might suck, but I'm trying. All I
You're
can
always
do is
giving
do
your
my
best.
best, and yeah, yeah. And like I said, I don't claim that every story is going to be a gem, just that I'm trying to make it that.
Right.
But whether I succeed or not is up to the audience. And sometimes, like I said, the audience and I disagree about whether I succeeded or not.
Hmm. Well, speaking of your best stuff, um, I love Brooklyn Dreams. I read it digitally years ago. I've been waiting for them to put out a hard copy. I'm so glad I pre-ordered it as soon as it was announced because
Yeah, it's a nice addition from Dark Horse. They did a beautiful job with Moonshadow, and they've done a beautiful job with this. And I wrote a new introduction. We have extras in the back. It's going to be a nice, nice
I can't
production.
wait because that was a story that's very, very different from the superhero stuff that you do. Almost like the Moonshadow. It's off the beaten path, but nonetheless, it's
Right.
it's a it's a comic. And what I always loved about it was that it was this book that the narrator is always saying, I'm going to tell you the story, but let me just tell you what happens first before we get you need to know this before we get to that. And the whole story is the build up because that's what
Story
makes
within
it,
story within story. Yeah, exactly. Well,
right?
because when if you sit down with your friends and you tell them a story, we're rarely linear as human beings, and memory is rarely linear in that way. So yeah, let me tell you what happened to me when I was like in my senior year of high school. Oh, and by the way, but when I was like 8, my aunt and uncle came over and blah blah. Well, let me get back. It's that kind of thing, and that's what I really wanted to do with Brooklyn Dreams, is let it have that sort of rambling, discoursive kind of thread running through it. It was simultaneously the one of the easiest and most difficult things I've ever done. It was easy because many of these were stories that I'd been telling verbally to my friends for years. It was really difficult because despite the fact that I changed the names to protect the innocent, it was all true. It was, there's no metaphor, there's no Spider-Man in front of me or Dr. Fate. It's
Yeah.
just me
Yeah.
telling you the story of this stuff that happened to me. So that part was kind of scary. It was kind of like being on a tightrope.
Yeah.
Like at any moment I might fall, and but it remains. There's 2 or 3 projects that I'd put like at the top of any list of stuff that I've done, and the top 3 kind of move around a little bit. But Brooklyn Dreams is always up there, always up there.
I would say Brooklyn Dreams, Moonshadow are very, very special books because they change the potential of what can be done with this medium. I know that there had been so many things done beforehand, but Brooklyn Dreams is one of those things where the artist's name again, it's escaping me. Was it not
Glenn Barr.
Glenn Barr. Thank you.
John J. Muth did Moonshadow, Glenn Barr did Brooklyn Dreams.
That's right. I was going to confuse them. So Glenn's work in that, it almost feels the way you would define how a memory looks, if that makes sense. Like
Hmm.
it's scattered, it's in black and white, but it's very vivid, and it's very detailed. But like Vincent Santini says in the book, the narrator who is the analog for you, it's like the facts aren't all there, but it's true. Like what I'm telling you is true. I don't
Right.
remember the day, and the memory or the visual that Glenn puts there, you're like, I understand what he's saying because sometimes the chaos in your memory, whether it's a good memory, happy memory, can be mishmashed the way he draws them in that book, and it's very
Right.
special when you see what the medium can accomplish.
Yeah, Glenn was amazing. And when they're young childhood memories,
Yeah.
it's more cartoony, things are more distorted, and then it's very, very realistic art and everything in between. Years ago, I think Denny O'Neil was writing an introduction to maybe Contract with God, the Will Eisner masterpiece. And he was talking about how Eisner's art kind of reflected memory, and that really set something off in my head. And that's really what I tried to do with Brooklyn Dreams. What Glenn did, it's so funny. It's not like Eisner, but it is. It's sort of like if Eisner was from a different generation and maybe dropped acid or something. Not
Yeah,
not
yeah.
saying that Glenn dropped acid, but I'm just using that as a metaphor. Um, it has an Eisner-esque quality because Eisner is a big inspiration to me. You read A Contract with God and you go, oh, comics can be this. Or even like Harvey Pekar in American Splendor. Comics can be that. Reading those kind of things inspired me. So with Brooklyn Dreams, I wanted to kind of just go and do something different and just play with exactly what you said. Play with memory through the writing, play with memory through the art. And I said the same thing about Sean and Sal, and I'll say it again about Glenn. He either met my expectations or exceeded them. I think I challenged him, and he always rose to the challenge, and then broke through the ceiling. And somebody once complimented us. They said something to the effect of, I always thought that the best comics are done by a single mind, meaning the guy that writes it and draws it is the same guy.
Hmm.
But with Brooklyn Dreams, that it had the feeling of a unified mind as if it was done by one person. And that was a high compliment. And you talk about creative chemistry. Glenn and I didn't know each other well. We still don't know each other well. We met in person once, and we've been on Zoom a couple of times in recent years, talking about this new edition. But the chemistry creatively was there from the start. Sometimes you don't have to even know the person, and we're getting into the metaphysics of
Hmm.
creativity here,
Hmm.
because the magic happens on the page. We're not meeting flesh and blood to flesh and blood. We're meeting words to pictures on the page, and there's a chemical combustion that happens. And as I've said many times, you can't make it happen. You can't force it. It either happens or it doesn't. And with Glenn, it happened, and it happened so beautifully with him. It was just an amazing collaboration.
Yeah, I don't think though that you're a difficult person to collaborate with either because you come to it seems like you come to a project with an intention, a good intention. And when a person isn't worried about, I need this done for me because this is my story and I need you to make my story come to life. When a person doesn't have that sort of, even with something like Brooklyn Dreams or Moonshadow that come from a very personal, private place in some ways, you, when the intent is to, let's make this as good as possible. And that's going to come from some of your ideas are probably going to make what I think is a good idea improve. So just as much as they let you breathe, you also, I think, pay it forward that way as a collaborator. From what I can tell from the people you've
And you
worked with.
challenge each other. The same thing with
Yeah,
Muth on Moonshadow. I mean, John J. Muth is one of the most talented human beings I've ever known in my life. And when you're working with an artist of that caliber, well, I had to raise my game. And then I challenged him to do things he wouldn't normally do in his art, and he had to raise his
right.
game. And the best collaborations kind of work that way. You spark each other, you challenge each other. And I said, it's comics. It's words and pictures. And I don't care how, I have all these great stories that are in Brooklyn Dreams, but otherwise it's just me sitting in a room telling you the story. It took Glenn to bring them to life. So, my life kind of became our life
Right.
within the context of that series.
Yeah. No, it's a
Yeah,
wonderful
yeah.
book. I'm so happy that it's being re-released in a deluxe format for
Yeah,
people to get
and I'll
their
say
hands
this
on.
too, yeah, which was I look back and it's really kind of amazing. As I was developing the idea, I could see in my head what I wanted it to look like. Just
Mm-hmm.
what I said, sort of a modernized version of Will Eisner,
Mm-hmm.
Eisner with a little tab of acid thrown in, you know. And and before it went to Paradox Press and Andy Helfer and Margaret Clark, we started. DC had a short-lived imprint called what was it called? I think was it Piranha Press? Piranha Press. A guy named Mark Nevelo was in charge of Piranha Press, but it only lasted a short time. So I'm in Mark's office, and he says, "Well, let me show you some artwork." You know, he's read the proposal and my outlines and whatever. And he opens his drawer and he pulls out this Glenn Barr art, and I'm like, "Oh, well, that's what I've been seeing in my head. That doesn't happen very often, you know?" It was like, yeah, that's the guy because these are the pictures. I've seen these pictures in my head already. So, yes, let's use this guy. That was a very magical thing, you know,
Mm.
very magical.
I
But I
think
have to say, you know, sometimes it doesn't matter what my motivation is or what a wonderful collaborator I am. Sometimes the chemistry is just not there. I've had projects where I was thinking of one recently. I won't mention the artist because he was an excellent artist, and we were working in the plot first style where I write a detailed plot, I get the artwork back, I put in the dialogue. And this guy was very talented, did a great job, and I just couldn't, something didn't click with the artwork. Something with my brain chemistry and the images on the page, and I felt like my writing got clunkier in response to what I was seeing. And maybe
mm-hmm.
he wasn't clicking with what was in my story. And that was being,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? Because,
Mm-hmm.
and again, excellent artist. I'm not knocking the artist. The artist was a terrific artist, which is why I would never mention the name because I'm not putting them down. It's just the chemistry wasn't
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Chemistry just didn't happen and the story just didn't work. And with comics, it's true of every element in the story. I've seen, you know, I've talked about letterers. I think letterers are the unsung heroes of comic books, you know,
Mm,
especially
yeah.
for the writer because they're the delivery system for my story. Your
It's
eyeball is
true.
taken in my story through those words that they're lettering on the page. And I have seen letterers who make it seem effortless, who just lift that story up and it flows into you, you know, just gently, easily. And I've seen other letterers, and I can see it when I'm reading the book myself. My writing isn't as good
Mm.
because the lettering is off. Or maybe they're a great letterer, but their lettering style doesn't suit the story and something gets gummed up. And so it's not flowing into your brain in the way that it should. And what your brain translates that as, oh, this story isn't that good. So the letterer is really, really, really important. You know, every piece of the puzzle in comics is important. When you finally have that book that clicks across, you know, you've got the right writer, the right penciler, inker, colorist, letterer, editor. Everybody has to come together and find a fine balance to make that to make a really great comic book story work.
Yeah, I think that's very important to remind us as readers because we're so quick to look at the writer artist, and at times the inker might get some bona fides as well, but the letterer, you're right. There's every aspect of the story. I didn't realize fully until I had hosted a panel with I forget the name of the gentleman now. He's working with Brad Anderson, who was with DC, and he does a lot of like Jeff Johns books. He's the colorist for those books, and he was just explaining how he chose to color a scene when it was a Batman book where the Joker comes in, but the eyes are a particular color and the lighting in the room did this so that you do feel scared,
Hmm.
so that you do, and you don't like, yeah, duh, like that changes everything, and it's
The
one of
color, you know,
those.
sometimes I'll get the black and white art, you know, and it's great, but then the coloring comes in, and it's sort of like, you know, Dorothy stepping from Kansas to Oz. It's like, oh my God, here's another whole other level to this story that wasn't there before the color hit the page.
Yeah, so everybody has a part to play in this collaborative effort, and it's almost like putting a television show together. It's the director, it's the actor, it's the people holding
Hmm.
like the people who made the
Yeah.
music.
Cinematographer. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Everything.
yeah. So it's a good thing to point that out to us to pay, because you do notice too, like there's been times where you've read a book and like for some reason I like the way this word balloon is lettered. I like how this guy did the sorry, the onomatopoeia. What do they call it? The sound effect, the word sound
Right,
effect.
right, right, right,
I
right.
forget
Yeah.
the proper
Onomatopoeia.
term
I think
for
you're
it.
right.
So I remember Walt Simonson was a specialist that like when he would slam the doom down and you'd feel the
Right,
impact,
right.
like it's part of the art in and of itself. So that,
Yeah,
yeah, that's true.
yeah. And the letterer brings that to life.
Yeah,
And even
really
with
does.
something as simple as a sound effect, right? The writers write the sound effects into the script. Some people think the letterer creates the sound effects. That's not correct. But the way that letterer draws and it's drawing, its art, those sound effects, has a huge impact on the story.
Absolutely.
Someone else, I think it was John Workman that used to letter the Thor stuff for
Yeah.
Simonson.
Yep.
Someone else doing that doom might not have had the same impact.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And then it made such,
Sometimes I'll get the lettering. Oh, go ahead.
no, no, I was just gonna say it made such an impact that they inserted that in the Death of Superman when they introduced Doomsday. That moment, like that same
Right,
thing that they did there, it carries
right.
on because it was done right. Sorry, continue your point.
No, just that sometimes I'll get the lettering back and I'll see, oh, can we make this sound effect bigger? Can we, so it has such it's important, and sometimes because of I think the 60s Batman TV show and every article about it being zap pow
Bam, pow, bam.
bam, we
Yeah,
kind of laugh at sound effects and sometimes they are silly, but sometimes they really, really, really used right um, are in a really important part of our toolkit as comic book writers to create that because comics they're movies in your mind, right?
yeah,
You've got a panel, it's just a still drawing and another still drawing and another still drawing. But the great artists move your eyes and then your brain fills in the space between the
yeah,
panels and you see it moving. And the lettering will do the same thing, even where the balloons are placed so that your eye will follow them across the page. Or the way I remember seeing this, Mike Plug was a master of this. The way he would position characters in one panel drawn in such a way, and I don't know whether it was conscious or intuitive on Mike's part, that, oh, there might be a hand going like this, something that was leading your eye to the next panel. You didn't realize it consciously, but he was
mm,
constantly moving you from panel to panel to panel. And the best artists do that. There's flow to the work. And
right,
when you see a comic page that's not working, it's because the artist has not mastered that flow yet. Things or the right? I can write exactly what I want to see in that panel. You could do an Alan Moore thing and write 3 pages about that panel. And an artist can come along and just draw that character, right? Oh, he's reaching out. Is he reaching out like this? Where's the hand in the panel? Where that hand lands can change the whole panel. And that's the artist's choice. Does it have flow? And you've seen artwork where the figures are kind of stiff, or it's not moving, or
mm-hmm,
something's off because they
mm,
chose the wrong. You could pick any moment in these 2 minutes here to create that panel, and they click the camera at the wrong time and
right.
pick the wrong moment. And the right artists always know when to click the camera and pick the right moment for that panel.
I think that's what, whether you like their art style or not, I feel like John Romita Jr. and Sal Buscema, when it comes to Spider-Man, that flow, they've got it in spades. Like
Well,
where
that's the
this,
artist storytelling, right?
yeah, and there's something
Visual
about,
storytelling. It's not, you could be the greatest artist in the world and not not know how to tell a story on a page.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, you could have 6 really pretty pictures in each panel and you're still not telling the story on the page.
And I think I find that to be the case with some artists who can do like that pinup better than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the
Mm-hmm.
artist of the actual story, then you got the cover artist, and they're not always of the
Right.
same ilk, right? But when you've got a person who can make
Right.
that story flow, it's all the difference in the world. You don't have to be
Yeah.
the most complicated artist. It can be very simple, but knowing where you're moving with these characters, and you lose yourself. That's when you lose yourself in the story.
I have to say, in comics, you want someone who can draw really well and also be a great visual storyteller. But honestly, the visual storytelling is even more important. If someone can move that story from panel to panel the right way, maybe they're not the greatest artist in the world, but they might be the greatest comic book artist in the world.
Right. That's
Maybe you
right.
don't want to see their painting hanging in a museum, but man, do you want to see them drawing your comic book this month?
Absolutely.
But guys like
Interiors.
Sal and Ramita Jr., they can also really draw.
Oh,
So that's what you hope for. The
that's
guy
what
that
you hope
can
for.
really draw and tell a story and move it from panel to panel.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up, what are some things that you've got cooking right now, things that we can expect, be on the lookout for to get some of your work into our hands?
We have got Spider-Man 94 is out now. The second issue will be out. on Wednesday, I think. I always forget whether release day is Tuesday or Wednesday these days because
They've
I think
changed
DC
them
releases on
around.
one day and Marvel on another. But this coming week, Spider-Man 94 number two will be out. Past few years, I've been working in prose again. I had two novellas, one called The Excavator, one called The Witness, that came out through this wonderful company called Neotext. I have a new one which kind of crept over the line from novella to novel for Neotext called A Dark Future, which I hope will be out end of the year, beginning of next year. I think I honestly, as objective as I can possibly be, which is not at all, I think it's one of the best things I've ever done. I'm really, really proud of it. Sort of
I
a
love that you feel
metaphysical,
that way about your work, that you have
yeah.
that sort of comfort. Because you've written a lot of great things, but for you to still have that fire, to like, I think this is the one. That's so nice to hear.
Well, I don't know if anyone's going to agree with me once it comes out, but I'm very proud of it. It's kind of a metaphysical time travel tale.
Ooh, okay.
Um, I have I'm waiting for the show to come back. I have an episode coming up in season two of Batman Cape Crusader, the
Oh,
animated
nice.
show on Amazon. Yeah, and God, there are other things. And Kevin McGuire and I, are you familiar with Patton Oswalt and Jordan Blum have the
Yeah.
Minor Threats universe over at Dark
Yes.
Horse. So we're working on a one shot for the Minor Threats guys, which is fun to be working with Kevin again.
That's awesome.
And other things. But that's enough for it right now. Other things coming up as well. And obviously, we're going to move forward with the Demultiverse sooner
Yes.
than later, I hope, to get on to the third chapters of all that as well.
That's so nice to hear that you're keeping so busy. What is it that keeps the creative juices flowing? Is it just continuing to create and not stopping?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just, if people weren't paying me to do this, I would be doing it anyway.
Right.
We may have discussed this before, but maybe 25 years ago, I went through a little crisis. And I was thinking about maybe I don't want to be a writer anymore. And that required me to do something that was really, really difficult because, we identify not just with who we are, but what we do. And what we do becomes part of our identity. And as a writer, it's such a deeply personal thing, to be a creative person. It really is an extension of who you are. So in order to work through this thing, I had to kind of take my writer self and remove it and surrender it to the universe, and
Mm.
wait for the answer. Should I continue to be a writer or should I not? And the answer that came back was, "Hey, schmuck, this is who you are." You know what I mean?
Can't stop.
If you weren't getting paid, you'd be laying on the floor staring into space, making up stories. It's just what you do. I'm a creative person, and that's just what I do. So as long as I have an idea that grabs me, I'll keep doing it. As my wife will often attest, when I don't have enough projects on the plate and I'm just sort of wandering around, I have extra time. I'm not a lot of fun.
Mm.
I'm
Yeah,
much happier when I'm creatively engaged. I'm much happier when I'm creatively engaged.
that's so true. So
And so
interesting.
many times over the years, it's been like, oh well, I'm done. I mean, I can laugh and think of the times I said I'm done with comics. After I finish this project, I'm never doing comics again. I probably did that two or three times, and then some idea comes along and you're off again. And the great thing about what I've done all these years is because I've gotten to do comics, I've gotten to do TV and film, I've gotten to do prose. So I've been able to bounce around in all these arenas too. But in the end, it just comes down to story. Tell a good story. And as long as I have a story in my head that I want to tell, I'll keep going.
Yeah. I find that you're a very good example of somebody who honors the idea as a living thing that comes to visit. And if you're not going to take
Yes,
it, somebody else
absolutely.
will. So it's up to you to
Yes,
to honor that idea. Yeah.
I've felt that maybe we've discussed it in the past. I feel like there's a dimension of story out there,
Yeah.
and the stories exist independent of us, and the story takes shape, and it's looking for the right person to tell that tale. And it stops at your house, and it stops at this guy. Nah, it's not that the right guy, not guy, and then it lands on me because the story exists, but now it's going to come out through the filter of my experience. So the very same story coming out through the filter of your experience will be a totally different story, even though the essence of it may be the same,
Hmm.
because we've had such different experiences and we have different obsessions and different themes in our work. So, but there's a part of me that really feels like the stories and the characters exist independent of me. And then it's sort of like this, it sounds like a science fiction story, this union, this
No, I get
merging of
it.
the story and the individual, and then it comes out through these through these lenses, literally these lenses, and it beams out and it becomes the story that's unique to me. And then if that same story had visited you, I've seen it, we're going overtime, but it's okay. Let me finish this thought.
Please.
I've seen it when I've worked on books where like, you have a writer's meeting and you all get together in a room and you work out a story, 4 or 5 writers, and you all agree on what the story is. And everybody goes home and writes their chapter. And I'm always amazed at how different everybody's chapter is. And like, if I had written that chapter, not for good, I'm not a value judgment, it would have been a completely different thing than the chapter that writer wrote, because it's coming out through the filter of their experience
Hmm.
and personality. And when my chapter, they might look at it and go, "That's not what we talked about in the room, but that's the way I saw it, and that's the way." So it's such a, that's what I love about the creative life, is that you get down to a certain point and it's inexplicable. It's a mystery. And I love the fact that after all these years of doing it, it's still a mystery.
Yeah.
It's great. I,
Yeah.
I want it to be a mystery. I don't want to understand the whole thing. I don't want
That's
to
the
understand
magic.
why do I get these. Yeah, I get these movies playing in my head, and suddenly a story exists that didn't exist before. And I'm just watching it like I'm an audience. And my goal is to get to the computer fast enough to write it down. I don't know. Where's that coming from? Is it my unconscious mind? Is it the dimension of story? Where is it coming from? It's a fantastic, magical thing.
I think it's the fact that you're aware it exists. Some people aren't. Some people, how did
Hmm.
you come up with that? And I think having created, not, I've never written story, but having created stuff and written songs and things like that, when you're at a point where it's like, what do I do next? And all you need is that first germ of an idea. And what ends up happening is you can't explain it, so that when you do say or have the confidence, like you often like, I feel really good about this one. It's one of my best things. I don't listen to it as it's like braggadocious. It's more like this idea came and it came out through me, but it's the idea that's special. Not so much how creative and special I am. It's that I just honored
Yeah,
what
yeah. Because
was
I
given to
have I
me.
have no clue. I have no
Exactly.
clue. I have no control. I've often said that, when I turn in a script, there's always a small percentage of the time where I can know this story is really good. And if the whole world tells me it sucks, they're wrong. But 90% of the time, I'm just doing my best. I turn it in, and if the editor called me up to say this is the worst thing you've ever written, I go, oh, I better rewrite it, Or if they call up and they say this is the greatest thing you've ever written, I'm surprised, I'm delighted,
Right. Right.
So it goes back to what I was saying earlier. All I can do is do my best. I sail the story out, but I don't know. I
Yeah.
really don't know. There's a certain, having done this for so many years, I have a certain skill set. I can
Yes.
put the pieces of the pipe together. I can
Right.
build the machine,
Right.
but so that I can always lean on that, but what you want is the inspiration to go with that, but that's why I like working on this prose in recent years. The first piece, it had been like 10 years since I really did some serious prose. That's like going to the gym and working muscles you haven't worked in a while. And then the second one is like, oh, these muscles are now working, now we can really go. And the third one, oh, now I don't even have to think about the
That's
muscles,
great.
they're just activated.
Yeah,
So
that's
we can
great.
talk about this stuff
Yeah,
forever.
we
Yeah.
and we're gonna hopefully we do another episode sooner than later, but always a
Yeah.
pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, it's
You can't,
great. It's great talking to you as well.
it's not often you can say this, but you're a gentleman and a scholar, and I appreciate you always coming year round, being able to talk to you. It's a special event for me. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks. My pleasure. Really my pleasure.